The cry in the park. Ryan Carter loved the solitude of the early morning. The world always felt lighter before the sun rose high, before the hustle and noise of daily life took over. Evergreen Park was his sanctuary, where he could lose himself in the rhythmic thud of his sneakers against the dirt trail and let his thoughts wander. That morning, the air was crisp, the kind that carried the promise of winter. The faint golden light of dawn seeped through the canopy of sycamore trees, casting long shadows that danced with the wind. Ryan's usual route took him past the old wooden benches, past the duck pond, and finally to the quiet grove where he often paused to catch his breath before heading home. But today was different. As he slowed to a walk near the grove, he caught an unfamiliar sound, a soft, muffled cry, almost swallowed by the rustling leaves. He froze mid-step, his breath fogging the air. It wasn't a bird or an animal, it sounded human. Ryan stood still, his heart thudding harder than it had during his run. His instincts told him to leave it alone, but curiosity tugged at him. What if someone was in trouble? He took a cautious step off the trail, then another, brushing aside branches as he followed the sound. The crying grew louder as he approached a cluster of overgrown bushes. His pulse quickened. He knelt down, gently parting the branches, and his breath caught. There, wrapped in a thick, faded blanket, was a tiny baby. For a moment, Ryan was frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. The infant's face was scrunched in distress, its cries weak but insistent. A pale hand poked out from the blanket, its fingers curled into a tight fist. The baby couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Hey, it's okay," Ryan murmured, though his voice wavered. He reached out tentatively, unsure of what to do. The baby's cries softened slightly at the sound of his voice, but its tiny body trembled. His mind raced. How had the baby ended up here? Who would leave a child alone in the cold? And why? Ryan glanced around, half expecting to see someone emerge from the trees, a panicked parent or a guardian who had lost track of their child. But the grove was silent, save for the wind and the faint chirping of birds. He pulled out his phone, fumbling with trembling fingers as he dialed 911. There's a baby," he stammered when the dispatcher answered. "I found a baby in Evergreen Park. It's all alone. I think it's cold, Anne." "Sir, calm down," the dispatcher said, her tone soothing. "Where exactly are you in the park?" Ryan described his location as best as he could, his eyes never leaving the infant. The dispatcher assured him that help was on the way, but even as he ended the call, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He removed his hoodie, carefully wrapping it around the baby to provide extra warmth. "It's okay," he whispered again, his voice soft and soothing. "You're safe now." The baby's cries dwindled into soft whimpers, its tiny body relaxing slightly in his arms. Ryan felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, disbelief, and an unexpected surge of protectiveness. Minutes felt like hours as he waited for help to arrive. He sat on the ground, cradling the baby and scanning the trees for any sign of the person who had left it there. His mind churned with questions. Was the baby abandoned intentionally? Or was this some tragic accident? When the distant wail of sirens broke the silence, Ryan's shoulders sagged with relief. A park groundskeeper, Mr. Avery, appeared first, his weathered face creased with concern. "What's going on here?" he asked, his gaze falling on the bundle in Ryan's arms. "I found a baby," Ryan said, his voice shaky. Mr. Avery's eyes widened in shock, but he quickly knelt beside Ryan, peering at the infant. "Good Lord," he muttered. "You did the right thing, son. Let's wait for the medics." When the paramedics arrived, they worked quickly, assessing the baby's condition and ensuring it was stable. Ryan handed the child over reluctantly, a strange ache blooming in his chest as he watched the paramedics place the baby in a warm carrier. "You found this baby all alone?" one of them asked, her eyes kind but probing. Ryan nodded. Behind those bushes. I didn't see anyone around. The paramedic gave him an approving nod. You might have just saved this little one's life. As the ambulance pulled away, Ryan stood in the grove, the morning light now brighter and harsher. Mr. Avery clapped a hand on his shoulder. You've got a good heart, Ryan. Not everyone would have stopped to help. Ryan nodded mutely, his thoughts still on the baby. He couldn't shake the feeling that finding the child was only the beginning of something far bigger than he could have imagined. The decision. Ryan stood motionless as the ambulance disappeared beyond the tree line, its sirens fading into the distance. The crisp morning air felt heavier now, tinged with the weight of unanswered questions. The park, once serene and comforting, now seemed strange and unsettling. Mr. Avery, the groundskeeper, remained by his side, his weathered face creased with concern. You did a good thing today, Ryan, he said quietly. That baby might not have made it if you hadn't found them. Ryan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Even as relief washed over him knowing the baby was safe, unease gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. Who would abandon a baby in the middle of a park? And why? He felt a deep tug of responsibility, one that didn't disappear just because the ambulance had taken the child away. He couldn't shake the image of the baby's tiny, trembling hands or the way its cries had softened in his arms. I think I need to go to the hospital, Ryan blurted. Mr. Avery raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? The authorities will handle it from here. I need to know the baby's okay, Ryan insisted, his voice firmer now. The older man gave him a thoughtful look before nodding. All right. Let me give you a ride. At the hospital. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air as Ryan entered the bustling emergency room. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, their voices blending into a background hum. Ryan's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as he approached the front desk. A middle-aged receptionist with kind eyes looked up. Can I help you? I'm Ryan Carter. I was the one who found the baby in Evergreen Park this morning, he explained. Is the baby okay? The receptionist's expression softened. Hold on a moment. She picked up the phone, speaking quietly before directing him to a waiting area. Minutes later, a nurse with curly brown hair approached him. You must be Ryan, she said with a warm smile. I'm Marissa. Thanks to you, the baby's doing well, stable and warm. No signs of injury or illness, thankfully. Ryan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That's good. Really good. Marissa's smile faded slightly. The authorities are involved now. Social services will be looking into what happened. Ryan hesitated. What'll happen to the baby now? Well, they'll stay in protective care until the investigation is complete. If no family comes forward, foster care might be the next step, she explained gently. The idea of the baby being shuffled through the system didn't sit right with Ryan. He clenched his fists, frustration simmering beneath the surface. How could someone abandon a helpless infant? And what kind of future awaited the child now? A conversation with Detective Harper. As Ryan sat in the waiting room, a tall man in a dark suit approached him. Ryan Carter? Yes, Ryan said, standing up. I'm Detective Harper. Mind if we talk for a minute? Ryan nodded, following the detective to a quieter corner. You found the baby in the park this morning? Harper asked, pulling out a small notebook. Yeah, Ryan confirmed, recounting the events in detail. Harper scribbled notes, his brow furrowed. Did you see anyone else in the area? Hear anything unusual? No, it was just quiet, Ryan said, frustration creeping into his voice. I can't believe someone would just leave a baby like that. Harper's expression was grim. Unfortunately, it happens more often than you'd think. Desperation makes people do unthinkable things. Ryan's chest tightened. What happens now? Are you going to find who did this? We'll do everything we can, Harper assured him. But these cases can be complicated. If you remember anything else, give me a call. He handed Ryan a card. As the detective walked away, Ryan stared at the card, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. A restless evening. Back home, Ryan couldn't focus on anything. His mom noticed his distracted state as they sat down for dinner. "You've been quiet all evening. Everything okay?" she asked. Ryan hesitated before telling her everything, finding the baby, the hospital visit, and the conversation with Detective Harper. His mom's eyes widened with shock. "That's incredible. But also heartbreaking," she said, setting down her fork. "I'm proud of you for stepping up, Ryan. It just doesn't feel right, Mom. That baby was left there, and no one knows why. What if no one comes forward? What happens to them then?" His mom sighed. "Sometimes life isn't fair. But you did what you could. That counts for something." Ryan nodded, though the unease lingered. Later that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind kept circling back to the baby. The soft cries, the fragile little body wrapped in a worn blanket, it all haunted him. He knew he couldn't just walk away from this. The baby had come into his life for a reason, and Ryan was determined to find out what that reason was. The unspoken bond. As the hours stretched into the night, Michael remained by the baby's side in the hospital room, his thoughts racing. The quiet hum of the machines, the soft shuffle of nurses outside the door, and the occasional murmur of the hospital staff were a stark contrast to the whirlwind of emotions that churned within him. His hand rested gently on the baby's tiny arm, the warmth from their small body radiating into his skin, a quiet reminder that he wasn't alone in this moment. The doctors had run their initial tests, and now they were waiting for results. Michael could only hope that the baby had suffered no long-term effects from being abandoned in the cold. The little one, whose cries had been so frantic when Michael first discovered them, was now calm, wrapped in a warm blanket and sleeping peacefully. Michael's mind drifted back to the park. How had this baby ended up there? Was there anyone searching for them? His mind couldn't fathom the cruelty of leaving such a helpless child all alone, abandoned in a cold park before the sun had even risen. It made no sense. He tried to imagine who could do such a thing, but every possibility left him with an overwhelming sense of helplessness. As Michael sat there, lost in thought, the door opened, and a nurse entered. She smiled at him, though her eyes held a mixture of concern and compassion. "Michael, we've got some preliminary results back," she said, her tone calm but reassuring. "The baby is stable now, and there are no signs of severe neglect, which is a good sign. We're continuing to monitor them, but you've done a wonderful job keeping them safe." Michael nodded, his throat tight. "I'm just glad they're okay for now. But, what happens next?" The nurse hesitated for a moment before answering. "The police are handling the investigation into the abandonment, and child services will be involved soon to assess the baby's situation. Right now, we don't know who they are or where they came from." That statement struck Michael like a blow to the chest. He hadn't realized it before, but the magnitude of the situation was sinking in. This baby had no one. No parents. No family. Michael had been the one to find them, to step in when nobody else had. The enormity of the responsibility weighed heavily on his young shoulders. As the nurse prepared to leave, she gave him a reassuring smile. "You've done more than most people would, Michael. And if you need anything, we're here. You don't have to go through this alone." Michael wasn't sure if the nurse had meant that as a statement of encouragement or if she truly understood how much he was struggling with the situation. But her words stuck with him. He didn't have to go through this alone. For the first time since finding the baby, Michael felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone. And neither was the baby. The search for answers. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, interviews, and visits from authorities. Michael had been called in by the police, who wanted to know everything he could about the discovery. They needed to determine who had left the baby behind and why. Michael sat in a small room at the station, the harsh fluorescent lights casting an unflattering glow on his tired face. The detective, a woman named Sarah, was kind but direct. "Michael, I know this is difficult, but we need your help. Anything you can tell us about what happened in the park could be crucial. Did you see anyone before or after you found the baby?" Michael shook his head, feeling a pit form in his stomach. "No. I was the only one out there at that time. I didn't see anyone. The baby was just there, alone." The detective took notes, her pen scratching across the paper. "All right, we'll do our best to find any leads. We'll check the area for security cameras, and we've already contacted Child Services. They'll be in touch with you soon." Michael nodded absently, the detective's words sinking in. The baby had no known family, no record, no clues. The thought of the baby being completely alone in the world weighed on him like a stone. That evening, after another long day of questions, Michael returned to the hospital to find the baby sleeping soundly. He sat by the crib, watching as the tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, the baby's peaceful face a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in Michael's mind. He wasn't sure what had driven him to stay so late, but something inside him told him he couldn't leave. Not yet. He was still unsure what the future held, but the bond between him and this little one was undeniable. Every day he spent by their side, every quiet moment they shared, brought him closer to a decision he wasn't yet ready to make. But he knew, deep down, that he couldn't walk away from this. He had to do something. A new family. A week passed, and Michael's life seemed to be in a constant state of flux. The police were still searching for answers, but nothing had turned up. There were no relatives, no leads, and no indication of who the baby was or where they had come from. The only thing Michael knew for sure was that the baby needed a home. Michael had been spending more and more time at the hospital, even though he was still technically a volunteer firefighter and had other commitments. But when he held the baby in his arms, nothing else seemed to matter. He was the only one there for them, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he couldn't imagine leaving. One afternoon, as he sat in the hospital's waiting room, the social worker, Grace, came to speak with him again. Her expression was more serious this time, and Michael could see that she was trying to gauge his reaction. "Michael," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I know you've been thinking a lot about this, and I want to talk to you about the possibility of fostering the baby. We're trying to place her in a safe home, but it could take some time. You've already formed a connection with her, and I think you're in a unique position to offer her the stability she needs." The words hit Michael like a wave crashing into the shore. Foster care. It sounded so final, so important. He had never considered it, never thought that his life could change so drastically. But as he thought about the little face that had looked up at him with trust in its eyes, he knew there was only one answer. "I'll do it," he said quietly, his voice firm. "I want to take care of her. I'll be her family." Grace smiled, relief washing over her. "I'm so glad to hear you say that. We'll start the process immediately, but I want you to know that this will be a journey. It won't be easy, but you'll have the support you need." As the days went by, Michael's life shifted in ways he couldn't have imagined. His days were now filled with paperwork, home inspections, and foster care training. But through it all, he never wavered. His commitment to the baby, now named Lily, was unwavering. Every day he spent with her, every moment of laughter or quiet cuddling, solidified the bond between them. He had become her protector, her father figure, and he knew he wouldn't let her go. When the day finally arrived to officially become Lily's foster parent, Michael could barely contain his emotions. The paperwork was complete, the home visits had gone well, and now, there was nothing standing between him and the baby who had changed his life. As Michael looked down at Lily, now resting in his arms, he knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would have its challenges, but for the first time in his life, Michael felt like he had a purpose. And that purpose was to be the father that Lily so desperately needed. A promise fulfilled. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, the day finally arrived when Michael received the official news. The paperwork had been processed, the checks had been completed, and everything was in place. The adoption was ready to be finalized. The news came as a relief, but it also left Michael with a sense of awe. It wasn't just about the legal paperwork or the validation that came with the title of father. It was about what the decision meant. This little girl, who had been alone and abandoned in a park, was now his daughter, and he was her father. He had promised her safety, love, and a future, and today that promise was being fulfilled. Michael stood outside the courtroom, holding Lily in his arms. She had grown so much since that first day he found her, her face now bright with curiosity, her eyes full of trust and wonder. The thought that this little girl, who had once known only cold abandonment, would soon be part of his permanent family filled his heart with overwhelming joy. The judge greeted them warmly when they entered the courtroom. "Michael, I understand you've been fostering Lily for some time now, and I must say, you've done an exceptional job. It's clear from the way you speak about her, the care you've shown, and the commitment you've demonstrated, that this is the right decision." The proceedings were brief but emotional. As the judge declared the adoption official, Michael could feel the weight of the moment. It was not just a change in legal status, it was a transformation of his entire life. He wasn't just a young man anymore, he was a father. The first thing Michael did was look down at Lily, her small hands holding onto his finger as if to remind him of the unspoken promise they had made together. "You're home now," he whispered softly to her, the words that had been unspoken for so long now flowing freely. "I will always be here for you. Always." And in that moment, as the reality of the adoption finally settled in, Michael knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. His life, which had once seemed uncertain, now had a clear purpose. He was no longer just Michael the volunteer firefighter, the young man who jogged through the park each morning. He was Michael the father, and he would do anything to protect the little girl who had shown him what it meant to truly love. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but Michael was no longer afraid. He had made a promise to Lily, and he would keep it for the rest of his life. This little girl, who had been abandoned, was now part of a family bound by love, compassion, and the unbreakable bond of a father and his daughter. Their journey had just begun, and Michael knew that with every step, it would be filled with joy, growth, and a love deeper than anything he could have ever imagined. Together, they would face the world, and together, they would thrive. A future together. As the months passed, Michael and Lily settled into a new rhythm. It wasn't easy, parenthood was challenging, filled with sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and moments of doubt. But every time Michael looked at Lily's beaming face, every time her tiny hands reached for him with pure trust, he knew there was nothing else in the world that mattered more than this. Lily had begun to thrive under Michael's care. Her laughter filled the apartment, a sound so pure and innocent that it reminded Michael of how far they had both come since that cold morning in the park. She had learned to crawl, then to walk, and now, at nearly 2 years old, she was beginning to say her first words. "Papa" was the first word she ever said, and when she spoke it, Michael felt a surge of pride and love that was hard to put into words. His life had transformed in ways he never imagined possible. He was no longer the carefree teenager who jogged through the park each morning, unaware of the life-changing events that would soon unfold. Instead, he was now a father, filled with purpose and determination. But with this new role came new challenges. There were moments when Michael was stretched thin, balancing his work as a volunteer firefighter with his responsibilities as a father. Some days, it felt like there weren't enough hours in the day. He missed sleep, and sometimes, he felt the weight of uncertainty. Was he doing this right? Could he be the father Lily needed him to be? One evening, as Michael tucked Lily into bed, her soft, sleepy smile gave him all the reassurance he needed. She may have been small, but she was a constant source of strength for him. She had helped him realize that even in the face of his own doubts, he had everything it took to be her father. The next day, Michael received a letter in the mail. It was from the adoption agency, notifying him that Lily's birth mother had been located. The news was a shock, and as Michael read the letter, he felt his heart race. The letter wasn't a message of reunion or regret, but rather one of closure. The birth mother had written to the agency, saying that she was unable to care for Lily and had made the difficult decision to leave her in the park, hoping someone would find her and give her a better life. She had signed the papers relinquishing all rights to Lily, and now, Michael was the only parent she would ever know. For a moment, Michael sat in silence, the weight of the letter heavy in his hands. He thought about the woman who had given birth to Lily, about her decision to leave her child in the park. It was hard for him to reconcile the woman who had abandoned a helpless infant with the loving father he had become. But then he thought about Lily, her smile, her giggle, and the bond they shared. This letter didn't change the love he felt for her. It didn't change the family they had built together. He carefully folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, choosing not to dwell on the past. He didn't need to know every detail of Lily's history. The only thing that mattered was that she was safe, loved, and part of a family that would always fight for her. As the years went by, Michael watched Lily grow into a bright, confident young girl. She was smart, kind-hearted, and full of curiosity about the world around her. Each milestone she reached felt like a victory, not just for her but for him as well. He was watching her become the person she was always meant to be, and he knew that it was his love and care that had made that possible. Lily began preschool, and with each passing year, Michael's sense of pride grew. He wasn't just her protector anymore, he was her teacher, her confidant, her biggest supporter. The love they shared was something that could not be broken, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As Lily got older, Michael had to start having difficult conversations with her. At first, she had asked simple questions about where she came from, and Michael had answered in the only way he knew how. He told her the truth, in a way that was simple and age-appropriate. He explained that she had been found in the park, and that he had been the one to take care of her from that moment on. He assured her that she was loved, that she was always safe, and that no matter what, she would never be alone. As Lily grew older, she understood more about her beginnings, and Michael was there every step of the way to help her process her feelings. She never questioned her place in his heart. She knew that she was his daughter, and that would never change. On her 10th birthday, Lily and Michael took a trip to Roosevelt Park, the very park where their journey had started. As they walked through the paths, Michael looked down at Lily, now a little older and more independent. She smiled up at him, a smile that was both carefree and filled with wisdom beyond her years. "Dad," she said, holding his hand, "I'm so glad you found me." Michael's heart swelled. "I'm so glad, too, sweetheart. I couldn't imagine life without you." And in that moment, standing in the same park where it all began, Michael knew that the journey had been worth every challenge, every tear, and every sleepless night. The boy who had found an abandoned baby was no longer just a young man with dreams of the future, he was a father, living the life he had always wanted. They sat down on the same bench where Michael had found her so many years ago, and Michael pulled out a small, worn-out journal. It was something he had started writing in from the day he found Lily, a collection of memories and reflections from their journey together. He handed it to her, and she opened it with curiosity, flipping through the pages of their shared story. "Everything you've done for me," Lily whispered, "is in here. I'll always remember." And Michael knew, in that moment, that this was the most precious gift he could ever give her, a record of their love, their story, and the incredible bond that had been formed against all odds. The future was still unknown, but one thing was certain: Michael and Lily's journey together would continue. They had built a life full of love, and as long as they had each other, there was no obstacle they couldn't overcome. They were a family. And nothing could ever change that.